And then the tank itself, we've talked about this tank a lot. It's 225,000 gallons, built 42. The remaining life is a big question mark for everybody, right? It's been solid since 42, which is what now? 60, 76 years?
Or 7, depends on what time of 42.
Yeah, it could have been any time. Let's call it 76 years.
Yeah.
And there's some, you can see a little bit of corrosion coming down. This is where all concrete cracks, so there's some water coming out, and you're seeing some limestone come out, calcium carbonate come out of the concrete. But it's in generally pretty good condition. There are interior and exterior coatings. The interior coatings are flaking, they're coming off, and the exterior coating is not beautiful. So it's a tank that is serving you well right now. Question is, what's the remaining life? Is it 20 years, is it 30 years? Nobody really knows without doing a bunch of work on it. You know, what we're worried about are two things. Number one, is that this is where the water is actually stored. Is the steel in there corroded? Is it cracking? Is it rusting? Is it going to cause problems down the road? And it was never really designed for the earthquakes that we're now supposed to design around. So it wouldn't stand up to the earthquake that we currently design. Now, whether we're going to have an earthquake or not, we just don't know. But that's one of the risks with this tank. So that's the existing tank. So we want to look at alternatives. What do we do about this? How do we fix them? And there's a lot of balancing needs to happen. And in Bayview, more than most communities, of course, we've had a pretty lively discussion back and forth about where does it make sense to spend money? Do you do something new? Do you retain what you have? With the aging storage facility in particular, do you repair what you have or do you replace it? With the pipelines, do you repair them or replace them? With fire protection, do you really even care about that? Do you want to increase your fire protection? And the other maintenance issues are maybe separate projects. So in November of last year, we identified, or the district was notified by Lakes Highway District that they were going to replace some of the roads in town, repave. And so the question is, what do we do underneath those roads? Do we replace the meters and the service lines? So those have been added in addition to that. So there are a lot of things to think about here, and the costs are pretty wide-ranging. Let me start with storage, and then I'll talk about the overall cost, and then we can talk a little bit about the alternatives that have been talked about to date, and then we can discuss whether they still make sense or whether we should be looking at something else. So the first one is whether you build a new tank to serve Bayview. This was the recommended alternative that the board selected. This is back in November or August of 18. September, yeah, somewhere in there. And the benefits of that is it gives you a life of 75 to 100 years, long-term life. It would require a new transmission main, so you'd run from the wells up to the new tank, but it addresses low water pressure issues because you're bringing that pipeline around where you can actually increase pressures in the northwest corner, and you can connect from this to Drumore, which solves a lot of the Drumore issues. And then it also increases your fire flow because you have a much bigger pipe going through town. So now you can feed a lot more water into the system. So that's the benefit of the new tank. The rehabbing the Farragut and replacing the Drumore tanks are two other options. And that gives you maybe a shorter life, but there's lots of rehab you can do, and that generally leads to a lower cost alternative. So that you're balancing on one side, new tank, longer life, potential to address some pressure issues. On the other side, you've got lower cost and potentially something that is a good asset that you can keep using.
Steve?
Yeah, Steve?
Provided it's fundable.
Well, we'll get there. That's a great question. And then pressure and fire flow, we have a couple issues here. One of the original alternatives was to keep the existing tank and run a 12-inch line all the way around Bayview up to the northwest where that new tank would go. And you can do that with a new tank or without a new tank. What that does, it gives you a longer life. It improves the pressure in the northwest corner in Drumore, and it gives you improved fire flow all the way through the system. One of the nice things is, by running that line, you could eliminate the Drumore tank entirely, because then you're bringing pressure from either the new tank or the old tank, and you could eliminate that pump station that goes up to Drumore. So there's some benefits there. If you don't do any changes, you still have, as we saw in that earlier image, you still have fire flows of 500, 1,500 gallons a minute. You still have pressure issues, but limited complaints. DEQ would probably allow you to keep that, although they will put that, you'll have to fund it at some point in the future to remain a viable water system.
And the Drumore tank wasn't just an option, it was a DEQ requirement to increase capacity. Whether we do it with a line that can supply that capacity, or it would take it an 11,000 gallon tank and turn it into a 110,000 gallon tank.
Exactly.
What's the existing size of that pipe now? What's your replacement over?
So right now, what happens with the current
Can you leave that pipe
system,
in and hook it to, a 12-inch to it, and leave it, use the old pipe, or is it?
is a great question. I'm gonna step back a couple here, because that's probably the best way to show you. So, and I should have done this, I'm glad you asked that question. So right now, you've got the tank located here, a couple wells, let's see, well here, and a well here. The wells pump into the tank and into the system. Currently, your system pumps water this direction, and it can either go to an upper pressure zone here, or it can go through a couple valves into the lower zone. And it flows across here into the Drumore pump station and up. And then anybody that's up here is served on that lower part of the line. And what's interesting about that is it makes sense for everybody that's down by the water. That's a lot lower than the rest of the system. So the pressures are really good down here, but you don't want these pressures to be so high that they blow up your plumbing. So that meant that the pressures are going to be low up here as you go up that hill.
Now, but you can put pressure reducing deals in the meter.
Well, and that's what they have here, right? So you got pressure reducing to lower the pressure. So if you ran that line around this way, then you'd bring that high pressure up here, and we put pressure reducing valves here and here to lower pressure going back down. So your question was, could you keep the existing system? And essentially what you have is just small pipes. You've got a 12-inch that goes here, but mostly 4s and 6s in this area. And so there's just not very much capacity. You just can't get much water through them. So that 12-inch coming around like this gives you a lot better ability to feed that area. That's a great question. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm glad you stopped me.
Yeah.
So, if you ran that 12-inch line around there, some pretty interesting things happen. You get a lot more fire protection in the main part of Baby. It doesn't do anything for Cape Horn, and it doesn't do much for Drumore if you just run this out there. But all of your pressures increase because of that 12-inch line, and that means you get a lot more potential fire protection there. Drumore you could resolve by connecting. Right now, all we show is if there's a new tank or a pipeline that went around, we connect to an existing pipeline that goes across, and that's not big enough. But you could put another 12-inch line here and solve the Drumore. We're trying to balance again how much money you spend and the value for solving each of those problems.
Is that old PVC pipe?
It's a bunch of different things. Most of it is not PVC. Robert, what do you mostly, or which do you guys?
The large diameter material?
That's PVC.